Matt, you can hear me okay?
I can. How is your weather today, by the way?
She's doing good. She's doing a lot better. Fortunately, she will have surgery, but we're happy that we got a resolution. So she's doing much better. All right, anybody that can hear me now, we're just going to wait a few minutes, make sure everyone is here. This is a great time to grab a cup of tea, coffee, glass of water, anything to get through you the next 30-45 minutes. We have set aside 2 hours today, but we will not be taking that much time. We usually do take a little longer, but we will have an extended question and answer session at the end. So we'll wait just a few more minutes. All right. Again, if you just joined us, we're waiting just a few more minutes for everybody to join. All right. Give it one more minute, about 3 after, and we'll get started. Again, if you just joined us, everyone, we're just giving us a few minutes to make sure everybody has a chance to join. Again, if you need to take a quick break, bathroom break, get a glass of water, a cup of coffee, go right ahead and do that. And we'll start at 3 after. All right, thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. We know how valuable it is. Wanted to introduce myself. I'm Tristan Hermanson. I lead the North American engagement team here at Advantage Club. I will be your moderator today. From nice to have to must to have is our topic, 2023 top employee engagement trends and tips. As many of you are aware, we are facing a crisis with 2/3 of the employees in the workforce are disengaged, and that is today's discussion. Guidelines for today, there's not going to be any chat, but there is an open question and answer. So you can open up the Q&A box and go ahead and ask your questions there. We highly recommend you ask those questions. We want interaction as much as possible to make sure that you guys are getting the answers to your questions that you'd like. But of course, after this session, we'll be sending over the presentation along with an opportunity to meet one of our senior leaders and take a further discussion on what we're seeing in your industry and organization specifically. All right, would love to introduce my colleague today. With us today is Matthew Willis, graduate of CU Law School. He is the SVP of North America. He, like I said, graduated from UC Law School or CU Law School and earned an MBA from Northwestern University School of Business. Matt has 25 years in the field and is a frequent speaker and panelist on employee retention and HR technologies. Matt, take it away.
Great, thanks, Tristan. Welcome, everyone. Good to have you all here for our fireside chat. Here's the punchline for today. We're going to talk about the updated trends. So June 2023, we have recent stats on anything related to retention, engagement, and recognition. What we're seeing is a growing and worsening trend. And then we're going to go through tips. So this is designed to be real practical and just share from working with literally hundreds of companies, Fortune 5, middle, and small business. What are we seeing that's working today? So For groups in that category are the buy-in, what do we see for metrics, the identification, the new ways we're getting information from employees, and then enlarging, how to enlarge participation, engagement, and recognition, some tips and tricks there, and then the feedback loop. So as Tristan mentioned, this is going to be interactive. It's designed to be questions as we go. So we will stop with those key questions. So if you have any questions, throw them into Tristan. Also, the disclaimer is, depending on your organization, the culture, your executive buy-in, industry, etc., you're going to have some specific questions. Some of those we will handle, but if we don't, we're going to send out a copy of the presentation. Happy to meet with you individually and just tell you what we're seeing with like companies. So with that, we'll move on to next slide. Great. So this is a summary. A lot of people on this webinar know most of this, but just as a summary of what's happening in terms of, hey, June 2023, we got to look back a little bit in time. So pre-pandemic, we were seeing a trend in organizations and in companies where, hey, people that we were hiring were telling us that they wanted some sense of work-life balance, some sense of purpose. It wasn't just about the career and the paycheck. We needed more. So a lot of this was the rise. We now have 4 or 5 generations working in our organization, and this idea of belonging and appreciation. So that happened pre-pandemic. Pandemic hits, and what do we have? Everything goes sideways. So we shut everything down, then we turn everything on. And when we turn everything on, there is a lot less candidates out there. And most HR departments are working with a lot less bandwidth. So it's a double win. Plus, we have this whole concept of great resignation. And then we've got this hybrid workplace. So all of our playbooks from 5-10 years ago aren't working in today's environment. We throw in a lot of technology and emphasis on HR. So we just have a big upheaval in the importance of people, but also a shift in how we're looking at people. Okay, now, most recently, it started kind of Q4 last year and into Q1, we have layoffs. So not only the specific companies, largely in tech, that had layoffs, but there is the recession ripples. So those that were facing layoffs in the companies, or people that stayed with survivor syndrome, and then this uncertainty as we look ahead to 2023. So a lot of moving parts to get us where we're at today. Next. We're going to use Coach Lasso today. For those that haven't seen Lasso, don't worry about it. We just got a few key quotes. So there's 2 buttons I never like to hit: panic and snooze. Okay, so let's look at a few different research firms on what's happening as of April, May, and into June here. Number one stat is, hey, 65 to 68% of the U.S. workforce, this is true Canada a little bit better, but the North American workforce are not engaged, meaning 32% are engaged. And the other key stat is, hey, for the hiring, regardless of if we have a recession or not, and regardless of these tech layoffs, most industries are still facing a very tight job market to get new candidates in the door. And when we get candidates in the door, they're still looking at other opportunities, and we're losing up to 1/3 of them. And this is across industries. Next important stat, 46% of employees are silently quitting. And what does that mean? That means they're disengaged. That means that, yes, they are working, but perhaps they're remote, or perhaps they're hourly, and they're more sensitive or attuned to other opportunities. Now, the other key stats revolve around turnover and how that relates to disengagement. So what is disengagement? It's lower productivity. That hurts the results of the company. Single disengaged employee, Deloitte did a survey, up to 34% of salary is what the company takes a hit. when we're disengaged. And hiring continues to be not only difficult, but more costly. So given all of this today, when we talk about engagement and we talk about recognition, it has always been a nice to have. Every company wants good employee satisfaction numbers, feeling good about the company, but we're really in a crisis. So we've moved forward in the ideas of, hey, priorities of the exec team, of HR, to, hey, it's a nice to have, now it's a must have. And if we're not addressing these issues, our competitors are.
And again, folks, please feel free to ask questions.
So when we bring this up, if we were in a live audience here in an auditorium, usually I say, okay, show of hands, who recognizes their employees? And we know that 90% of everyone's going to recognize their hand, more than that. Sure, we all recognize employees. And then we say, well, what kind of recognition? Well, we do annual service awards and we have teams and we train our managers to recognize employees. So that's consistent. 90% of businesses indicate they recognize their employees. And this is from Towers Perrin and World at Work. But if you interview those same employees, only 40% are saying they've been adequately recognized by the supervisor, and 65% will say, no, they haven't received any recognition. So our concept at the senior level of what is recognized and are we recognizing people has changed. And what is that causing? That's causing friction. The other thing that we're contending with is this idea of hybrid work employment. Now, the hybrid workforce, that's nothing new. A lot of people moved from working 9 to 5 in an office pre-pandemic. But today, we only have 37 to 40% of people back in the office as a full-time status. So we have created, for companies that weren't dealing hybrid, now it's a definite need to flexible work hours, workforce, work from home, and that creates a whole nother level of how do we recognize our employees. Next.
Matt, I do have a question. How is the cost of replacement estimated? $4K per replacement, just curious how that is calculated.
Yeah, great question. We'll dig into it a little bit more, but a couple different ways. It varies by industry and company size and depends on what type of position you're looking at. But the stats across all industries are roughly $4,900. So that takes into talent acquisition costs, and going out and finding someone and replacing an employee. Obviously, that is much higher for highly educated, lots of work experience, software technology, etc. But that's typically how we get those numbers. And then we do have the ability to go by industry, by level of experience, and look at what that costs. The most important stat along with that, though, is over the last 5 years, that's almost doubled. So historically, it's gone up just a little bit year after year. Now it's on a huge arc, so that it costs a lot more to find employees and the turnover is a lot higher. So that's where we're at. Great. 2023 recognition culture. So here's the buckets we're going to talk about. One is the buy-in. And what is buy-in? That's talking about, hey, what makes recognition? What makes engagement critical to the CEO, to the board of directors? And what are those key measurements? How have those changed? Second is identifying, hey, what are employees saying they want today? And are we measuring that accurately? Third is expansion. And this is some of the meat and potatoes. What are the practical things we're seeing out in organizations that they're doing to add both recognition as well as engagement? And what are some practice tips there? And then finally is the feedback loop. If we're not encouraging more fun, active, meaningful ways to get engaged and training up our folks, then it doesn't work. So we're constantly getting better.
Got another question for you. What are some examples of ways to recognize your employees?
Such a great question, and we've got lots of them, and stay tuned. We're almost there. Next.
All right.
Okay, so let's start on that identification, then we'll get to specific examples. We will send this out to everyone, so you don't have to copy this. We'll send it to you. But AIHR is a great organization, and what they did is they put together, hey, what is the employee engagement return on investment? So for every dollar I spend related to employee engagement, how do I track that back to the bottom line? So number one is productivity. Makes sense, right? If I have employees, whether they're working from home, they're frontline employees, third shift employees, or corporate employees, if we are feeling more engaged, meaning higher sense of belonging, recognition for my work, ability to interact with colleagues as well as manager and peer, my productivity goes up. I feel like I have a voice. Likewise, we're going to have less turnover and higher revenue for employee, lower absenteeism, and importantly, that comes out. If we've got a happy employee, that's going to equate to a better experience with our customers. Sales go up, retention goes up. You can see how that works. There are various metrics that have changed here. So we're seeing new metrics that are being tracked in terms of engagement in employee experience, employee satisfaction, where we're seeing eNPS scores. And what is eNPS scores? Marketing always uses NPS scores. It's Net Promoter Score, and it means, hey, if you're going to use our product or service, would you recommend that to a friend? That's always been a key marketing stat. eNPS score means, would your employees recommend working at your organization to a friend? And how high is your eNPS score? So we look at a couple of different scores that we see that are gaining momentum in metrics because the C-level and the senior HR folks, senior business line leaders are all recognizing, hey, the people issue is really critical. And how we're doing as an organization with our people really impacts that bottom line more than we anticipated. So that's how we're seeing kind of the buy-in. And that buy-in is critical if we're going to make any meaningful progress. Next.
So on that, a question really quick. How do I get my employees to leave me reviews?
Oh, great question. It's difficult. Quick answer to that, we'll touch on a little bit more, is I would look at multiple ways of getting reviews. What we typically have with our surveys that go out or the emails that go out, we have a lower and lower percentage, and the credibility or the validity of some of those are being called into question. So what do? The first way to do that is just increase that feedback, increase that informal communication up front. Come up with multiple different ways to get that information other than the survey or other than that quarterly or yearly survey. So the first is add some additional layers and levels and opportunities to get more information. The second is to actually have an interview rather than the survey, or train up our managers to get that information. And then the survey, we can do multiple surveys, better questions, different times, pulse surveys, more frequent surveys, so that we're looking at different ways to participate. So those are kind of the big three, but a real good question. I think ultimately we want to get more information, more data on what's going on with our employees, and we'll talk a little bit about that going forward.
So I also got a question regarding ROI. What sort of KPIs are you seeing set up by companies to measure, gauge success in regards to engagement programs?
Yeah, love it. The big new ones are the eNPS that I just mentioned. We're also seeing engagement scores. So literally by function or by location, how many people are engaged. That can be simply responding to emails, surveys, getting engaged with company activities. The other one is engagement, eNPS, and then retention, absenteeism, turnover, all of those. I think we're seeing a lot more, and we're seeing more granular metrics. So by manager, by location, by function. Good question. All right, so we talked about the buy-in. What are ways to do that? We get the numbers, we get the metrics. Now let's talk about the needs assessments. So as we just talked about, hey, I'm doing these surveys, and the question was, I'm not getting enough reviews, or I'm not getting clear reviews, or I'm not getting enough people to respond. So what we're seeing is a huge trend in more ways to get data. And some of that is just an HR tech in general, post-pandemic push, so that now we have better technology that we can put into or add to our tech stack that allows us to do pulse checks or reach out to other people in the organization. So more engagement surveys, more frequent surveys, and these pulse checks. So surveys are still very popular, they're important, but they're better today, they're more frequent today, and we're seeing a change in that. Much bigger opportunity, I think, across the board that we're seeing with successful organizations is adding the informal assessments. We're only going to get so much on the surveys, so what else? Well, what else is setting up one-on-ones where once a month or once a quarter, we don't ask about numbers and job description and performance review, but we ask about how are things going? What would you like to see? What are you hearing? How can we make things better? Having face-to-face qualitative assessment of what's going on in the organization. That's very powerful. And we're seeing a lot of that going on. If not the one-on-ones specifically, adding some time to regular one-on-ones, actually having one-on-ones, right? Having longer connection time between employees. So when we see a Zoom call, a practice tip is, hey, the first 5 minutes, the organizer of the Zoom call doesn't bring up the agenda. It allows people to socialize. And then we're seeing employee resource groups. So some of our larger organizations, we've had these in place for a while, but we've seen a big influx in, hey, it doesn't have to be formal with a manager running this, but we want to have employees drive a diversity committee. Maybe it's fairness committee or different committees that are important within the organization, but more employee interaction. And it's across functions, across business lines. So we're seeing lots more ways to get information qualitatively, as well as the surveys. I think the third and biggest explosion is technology. So it's what we do, and that is providing a platform that is easy for people to use, whether it's mobile on their app or using it through their desktop, and it's a simple button, a single sign, but allows you to recognize and do peer-to-peer appreciation. It allows us to do engagement events. So it doesn't matter if you're third shift or if you're in the corporate office, we're seeing and connecting individuals and creating reasons for people to connect. So that shoots up engagement scores. We also see just virtual events, where we have to proactively put things together, not just the happy hours, but maybe the leadership development luncheons, the lunch and learns with people that are executives that we want to hear from. We're proactively seeing a greater amount and need for combining and connecting those individuals. And that's what gives us a better pulse check on what are the needs of the employees. So those are the big three we're seeing. Next. Lasso. Boy, I love meeting people's moms. It's like reading an instruction manual on ways they're nuts. Next. Great. So what do we see in 2023? This is always evolving, but there have been significant changes year over year in predictors of job satisfaction. So once we get our analysis, we got our surveys, we got some pulse checks, we got qualitative stuff going on. What we're seeing is a huge rise in flexibility. No surprise. When we ask the top reasons for staying with the job, usually it's pay and benefits. That's always going to be number 1 or 2. But beyond that, flexibility has jumped up. And that means we're really in an age today where if you are with an organization that requires you to be in the office from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, you're at a competitive disadvantage because people want flexibility. The other thing we see is, hey, the belief in the company, product, service. So pulling over that Gen Z millennial, there's got to be a purpose behind what we're doing, that we are impacting our customers in the world positively. After that, huge jump up in recognition, job satisfaction scores with recognition, sense of belonging. And let me explain. Quick story. CHRO of CB Richard Ellis, 100,000 employees, global commercial real estate, and she said, with work from home, pre and post pandemic, we haven't seen a big drop in productivity. We're still seeing 70% or so productivity measures. Now it's taken a little bit of a drop, but by and large, that flexible work environment hasn't dramatically decreased productivity. The world is sharp, and we've figured out how to stay productive. But employee well-being, if you look at the numbers from 5 years ago, 70% of employees felt some reasonable well-being, and that's plummeted post-pandemic. Now we're at 38%, 39%, 40%. Means 60% of employees are not feeling great. They're not feeling great about their job. They're not feeling great in general. What we're missing is that human connection. We're seeing it in the numbers. So that sense of belonging, how to put that together, becomes increasingly more important for our companies. And then beyond that is that responsibility. I like what I'm doing. I'm given some challenging skill sets and opportunity for growth and development. So that's kind of our big six, and it has changed. And it's changed because of the pandemic, and it's changed because of millennials, and it's changed because of technology. All those are working together. Okay, next.
Question. Do you have any creative ways to increase the sense of belonging?
I do, and that is a great segue. So let's move on to the next slide. We got two we got to address here, right?
Yeah,
this is a new age employee. Go ahead, Tristan.
I said I have another one for you too when you're done with this one. Let's get we'll get this first.
So this is the checklist: culture, autonomy, growth, flexibility, purpose, recognition. And if we get to the next group, we can answer our question. So what are the expanding the avenues for recognition? This touches on, we've had two questions now. So what are ways to expand this? So keep me honest. I want to give you the buckets. And this is from multiple research firms and a lot of qualitative analysis. And what we do is we work with companies that have a very high employee satisfaction, and what are they doing, and what are they doing different today, as well as companies that are struggling and what are they missing. So what we're seeing is we have to, as an organization, take a more proactive way of giving individuals opportunities to engage. What does that mean? Service markers. Learning and development has changed quite a bit, and it's a big hot topic. How do we train up people quicker? How do we get them the right skill set? There's right skilling. What we're seeing is when people hit certain service markers in learning and development, we're celebrating that certificate. So if someone comes in and they go through a training for the first 2 months or first month, that certificate, that level 1 training is completed, that's celebrated. That goes to the team, or maybe the division, or maybe the whole company. So we're seeing service markers there. On the front lines, hourly workers, we're seeing, hey, let's celebrate. We have an individual who has not missed 1 day of work, 1 hour of work for the quarter. That should be celebrated, and that name should be celebrated and going out to people. So service markers, we're seeing that come out in forms of ways for recognition and engagement. After it's recognized, if we have that ability, then that builds on positive reinforcement. Hey, great job, Tristan. Saw that you were up there 90 days. That's how that works. Engagement. The other engagement recognition is birthdays, anniversaries. A lot of people do this. Most of the time it's not automated. When it's automated, that becomes just a quick notification. And that notification is, hey, it's birthday for Tristan. We don't get into age, but we certainly get into birthdays. It's a reason for celebration. Bigger companies, it's just anniversaries, work anniversaries, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and that is celebrated. Sometimes that has a reward. We don't need to celebrate the reward, but we certainly want to celebrate that service. We see more birthdays, anniversaries, we see that digitized. Groups and committees. So we built on this a little bit, but we're seeing an explosion in creation of new committees. What does that mean? We traditionally had maybe a couple employee options or ways to get involved. We had a diversity committee, maybe there was a volunteering committee. Now we're seeing more and more opportunities for employee-led committees or groups. As an example, we just worked with a company. They have now created a photography club. And the photography club is just an opt-in. You don't have to join, but if you want to join, then this group, and it's now gone from 2 to 16 to 30 people on all sorts of different areas of the business. Most of them didn't know each other, but they're sharing photographs. And then once a quarter, they're going to have a little photography contest, and that may make it to the organizational annual report. I mean, that's just an example. We see that with cooking. We see it with diversity groups, development, leadership. So lots of groups and committees that allow people to get engaged with one another outside of the normal work environment. Then we see that.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Matt, didn't interrupt. You have a few questions, but I believe you answered them already, but just wanted to kind of
Sure.
wrap those. So the 3 questions I got were, specifically towards those hourly workers. And then someone also asked for remote and hybrid workers. How are we continuing to keep them engaged and making them feel recognized? So hybrid and remote workers, as well as those hourly workers, which I know you touched on briefly. Just wanted to see if you had anything to expand on.
Yeah. So let's talk with remote and hybrid. I think these 5 are what we're seeing. Hourly is tough. I mean, hourly is really tough. It's tough to recruit hourly. It's even harder to retain hourly. So what are we seeing? The first is how are people being engaged? It is across the board very difficult for hourly worker to get very excited about responding to an email and or getting some or giving some appreciation to colleagues. What we see working is app-based, a phone app that works, and having individual teams so that when an hourly employee comes on board, that there is an announcement, welcome and a little bio, and it goes to a team, and then it might go to a division. And then what happens is after that learning segment, maybe it's 2 weeks, then we have another segment that comes out, and then we have those opportunities for different awards, etc. Where we see hourly really get involved is on the events. And so the 4th prong of this is events. Events are usually non-work related. So events could be, we just had May, we saw a lot of Cinco de Mayo, Latin themed events. It'd be an opt-in, and it talks about, hey, we're going to have a speaker. That's just something that's exciting. In March, we had March Madness, and it was simply an opt-in. So it doesn't matter if you're hourly or corporate, but hey, we're going to have an opt-in, pick the teams, and we have gift cards for the top 3 employees. So we get them involved, get all of our folks involved through some engagement events in addition to that recognition. And then we use those announcements to create opportunities for people to meet one another more often, more frequently. So hourly is tough, but we think the phone app works, engagement events work, and then getting those specifically to, hey, if we find some needs or find some commonalities of activities outside of work, and then creating those little communities, we do see an uptick in the engagement and retention. Let me move over to events, though. Events can be short-term or it can be long-term. So events right now, when we have a volunteer event, let's say our charity or choice in our organization happens to be United Way. And in United Way in April, we're going to just have a big challenge, or we're going to have a big contest. Opt in if you want to. If you don't want to, that's fine. but we're going to have leaderboards. We'll do it by teams, and we'll do it by individuals, so everyone can participate. So our job is to have lots of different events, and we steal good ideas from other companies, and then we get people engaged. And when people are engaged, then we double down and try something similar to keep that engaged. And contests are always a big one. Usually it's going to be around something that is around the workforce. Doesn't have to be just the sales incentives, but it can be contests around volunteering, it can be contests around services, a number of different. But between all of these prongs, we're creating more and more opportunities for people to get engaged, and therefore they're going to be more recognized. And I think if we go to the next slide, we'll actually kind of codify some of these things we talked about. So more recognition, that's going to be your announcements, service milestones, the groups, contests, and then the peer-to-peer recognition. The most powerful of all recognition is that peer-to-peer. So allowing individuals to say, hey, great job. And easily, the easy ability to send quick note, hey, great job. What we're seeing with that peer-to-peer is also ability to drop an audio or a video or a quick picture, and that creates a little more buzz around that recognition. On the engagement events, holidays, volunteering, employee groups, digitizing any of the diversity inclusion events, and sports. All of these together, the engagement recognition expands the opportunities. Next.
I did get a question from someone that isn't anonymous. So Christy, won't say your last name, Christy. What about if you have multiple facilities, approximately 1 hour apart, all are warehouse environments, and not everyone has computer access? Which I know you did allude to the mobile application. So that would be the way to handle that. But Matt, if you'd like to expand on that, then I have another question after that one.
Sure. Yeah, Christy, great question. And $1 million questions. How do we engage and retain hourly, especially in warehouses? And the big movement we're seeing, and there's a lot of data behind it, is web-based. Does not work as good as using a phone. An app works really well. Now you will immediately say, hey, our hourly workers can't use phones while they're at the warehouse. And we know that. And there's 10% that no matter what you're going to do are not going to be engaged. But when you have easy notifications and it's positive reinforcement and positive recognition and in some neat, fun, likely to participate events, people will start that adoption, and that will change. And especially if we have ability to lump teams and groups and divisions together, we're seeing a big push for that. So kind of all of the things we talked about, but using the app and the social versus just the email is a big driver. So we're seeing about a 15 to 25% jump with those that are very skeptical of using the app, that the app works cross generation.
So
Tristan,
follow up to that, very similar. How do you handle contract workers? And I'm going to also ask this question, not just contract, but maybe even part-time.
Yeah. Let me give you an example. We have a large client, security guards, independent contractors. We also have a sales organization, independent contractors. We also have an insurance client with independent contractors. All three of those are similar in that a lot of hourly employees, and they're free agents. So no matter what we're going to do, we need to be sensitive to the legal structure, right? Because they have the ability to go elsewhere. But what we're seeing is, again, similar to the hourly, is taking any and all means from the moment they join and day one on the job to create that sense of inclusion, to create that sense of belonging. Immediately put them on the app, immediately get them involved as part of the team, immediately get their name recognized and announced. And when we are doing any of these contests or recognition for service or, hey, first month completed, especially at that first month and at that 90 days, we are creating some recognition amongst our peers. We also see with part-time and hourly and independent contractors creating peer groups. We need to be careful with that. We usually have a couple mentors that have been around, but we're creating these little tiny pockets of community so that instead of just punching in the clock, knowing no one, looking for your next job at $1 an hour higher, all of a sudden we've got some sense of belonging right out of the gate. And then there might be something that I want to look into. Could be classes or development group or people with like interests, but we're offering enough of these opportunities and recognizing these people that it works. And we're seeing a better hit rate, up to 20% on retention, where we have classically always had a terrible time with those part-time. It's tough, and we can talk in further detail on some of these, but those are the big ones. Thank you. Okay, so great one. We just talked about warehouse, hourly, how do we retain them? Hey, taking on a challenge is a lot like writing courses. If you're comfortable while you're doing it, you're probably doing it right. All right, so we're going to wrap up on the strategies. The punchline on the strategies is do more recognition, do more for engagement, automate it where you can, and then tie it to high-end metrics so that we can plug in, start it, and show the increase. And then steal what's working elsewhere. That all works. What we are seeing is we always get the question, well, how about rewards and recognition? If you're doing the service awards, we've traditionally done once a year and we give out a plaque, or we might nominate, or the managers nominate someone and there's a trip involved. All of that goes on. We can tell you the stats show, hey, there's a 3x return on investment if there's an award associated with appreciation. So, and it ironically, it can be a $5 Starbucks gift certificate. It still is a 3x compared to some of the other rewards we get. What we're seeing is everything that was physical. So the memberships and the physical trophies, those are largely out. What's in is flexible rewards. So offering rewards that, hey, you just got 10 points for winning that March Madness contest. And then you're able to cash in that point for multiple different gift cards, or maybe a marketplace item or some swag. But it gives the individual the opportunity to cash in those rewards. And by and large today, 80% of individuals are going to pick a gift card, and it's usually going to be a Target or an Amazon. But having the opportunity to cash that in for other things is a huge benefit, and people will accumulate that. We also see the ability to use those flex points or rewards towards wellness, or towards development, or towards a number of things that weren't available or thought of. So experiences are big right now. Benefits that are flexible, exciting, fun, then it's even more to give those rewards. Should be easy and also easy to redeem. Next. The good old thank you card goes along. Next. Okay, so let's close this up. Recognition. All of this is important, but as we all know, when we take on an initiative, and a lot of this is change management, we need to get that exec buy-in and measure it, but then we're going to have to do things, right? So part of this is if we're talking about informal assessment or getting some more information, we got to spend some time training our managers on what questions to ask, how to solicit feedback, how to put people at a situation where they're going to elicit some positive feedback and then celebrate that feedback. Next thing we need to do is we've got to keep things fresh. So especially in today's environment where we know people are disengaged, we have to come up, and we can cheat on this and we can automate this, but we've got to come up with more fun, better ways for people to meet with individuals, more ways to be recognized, more ways to engage. And finally, we seek the feedback. What's working, what's not working. Part of our task we've got about 3.2 million clients. Part of our task is to make sure we're meeting with those individuals each and every month per client, and then walking through the numbers. What's working, engagement events, recognition, etc. What's not working? Because if people aren't engaged, we need to figure out what will engage employees. And it's much different at the warehouse than it is at the corporate office. So we need to cater those events and those communities accordingly, stay flexible, and then we rinse and repeat and bring that feedback loop right along. Next. Okay.
I do have a few questions, but I'll wait. We can leave them to the end, Matt.
Great. We're almost there. So what's the punchline here? We know what happens when we have disengaged employees and high turnover. Now, what happens when we have engaged employees? So this is Vertex, a venture capital firm. They did pretty extensive research on this and said, hey, it's a simple proposition. You get 17% more productivity, 20% more sales, 41% lower absenteeism. So when we're talking about supply chain, that's huge. Best or customer ratings. So net, 25% more profitability if we can drive that engagement, if we can drive that retention, if we can drive that recognition higher. So it works, and there's companies that are figuring this out and have figured it out. By and large, we're in transition. So if you put your money into that engagement, you're going to see that. Okay, so we're going to conclude with this. Now is the time for all of the leaders on this call, for HR, senior folks. We are experiencing unprecedented disengagement. Retention couldn't be a more important topic at the C-level, at the board level. Now is the time to pounce. And we can do it with numbers, and we can do it smart, and we don't have to change everything at once. But by looking and getting those stats and showing how making a couple of these changes does move the needle, we can move a lot more needle. And that's all what we're here for anyway. It's all about people. We just have a unique opportunity to really make some neat changes in the immediate future. Next. All right, so we'll close it with, to win the marketplace, you must first win the workplace. And with that, thank you for your time. We're going to open it up to questions right now, and remember that we are going to send out the presentation, and if you have specific follow-ups related to anything that we didn't cover, happy to talk with you, and we have a pretty senior team that can meet and help you out. All right.
All right. A couple questions we had, Matt, were, can you customize or create tailored programs to different departments and employee groups?
The answer is yes, and the answer is you should. And the answer is what we're seeing is that you just need to be careful. There is a bucket that should be company-wide, and that can be your employee satisfaction surveys or quarterly satisfaction surveys. It should be across the board because you need those stats. But what we'll find is there's dramatically different things that work for recognition and engagement based on age, based on amount of experience, and based on what your job function is. And we actually have a whole playbook for tech employees that there's some engagement and fun events, and we do some gaming things that have a high correlation that would be totally not practical for corporate banking environment. So, part of what we do is we don't go overboard and create a lot of customization, but certainly looking at function and locations, I think it's really, really important to.
All right, so next question I got was, and I love this, how do I personally, and I'm going to make this short, but how do I personally stay motivated, engaged myself? It's very hard when you have such such disengagement at all levels in the company. And I'm actually going to do a little follow-up to that. So if this person is disengaged, how do they make their leadership team aware of this? And, how do you get their buy-in?
That's a great question. I think two parts to that. One is just how do we all stay engaged in this crazy environment? It's tough. One is recognizing, hey, maybe we're not as engaged as we need to be. And I do think it takes a little bit of our motivation to create some of those opportunities for ourselves. So hook into if there are committees or employee resource groups, et cetera, at your organization, get involved, raise your hand. Even if it's a little uncomfortable, raise your hand. Outside of work, get engaged, get involved, find things that you are passionate about, and force yourself to go join a meeting or at least a webinar or a call. So that I think is general. That's not my advice. I'm just stealing from what the stats are. How do you get an organization to read the music? I think webinars like this, and you put together the numbers, and there's one or two slides you can steal from us, and you say, hey, look, we need to have a committee, and I'm going to go raise my hand, and I want to create cooking club or cooking committee, or I'm going to raise my hand. We have a diversity committee, but we're not doing enough. I'm going to raise my hand, and you know what? We're going to be doing something for Pride Month, and I want to take the reins on it. And you raise your hand and you let HR know. And I think once you do that, you'll be surprised because there'll be 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 other hands that are raised. And if you get some feedback that is not empowering for you, then that's problematic. But usually you're going to get some folks that'll give you some wind in your sails for doing that.
So I have kind of a follow-up question. Two people asked a very similar question with different types of employees, specifically like we mentioned before, those contract workers, part-time workers. How do we offer different benefits, establish different lines between them? And then someone had asked, since they're not technically a full-time employee, how do you keep the sentiment of the other employees positive when we're also recognizing these people that only work for us part-time or they're not really truly an employee?
These are good second level questions. I'm not going to completely punt, but we are putting together, we're actually authoring it'll just be a 2-page article that's specifically addressed to engagement and recognition with part-time and independent contractors. So stay tuned, and you can always check our website. That's a July bullet point. But we're asking companies about that now, and we're asking from Amazon on down to very small organizations, what's working? Everyone is scrambling to answer that question. But what we do see, though, is by and large, the more opportunities and the easier it is to get people involved, there is a positive correlation with that sense of belonging. And that sense of belonging is critical. That recognition is critical in the ability for someone to stay at one job versus another job. So it's always tied in, I think, especially with if you're talking warehouse or smaller, always in conjunction with more in-person events, more active management, and more ways to create one-on-one time with employees, find out what motivates them. All of those things have just taken more and more accelerated view of how to do that, along with the app, along with the recognition. How that affects people that have been there a long time, that's a tough one. I'm not sure I have an answer for you on how to bridge that gap. But I would err on the side of inclusion and as much opportunity as we can to have people back.
All right. And I believe that is all the questions that I had. So if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. We will be sending over a copy of this presentation today, along with our contact information, so that you can meet with one of our leadership team to discuss your industry specifically and hopefully answer some of those questions and give you some solutions. Thank you again so much, everyone, for your time today. Thank you so much, Matt, for speaking with us today. And you all have a lovely day, and please recognize your coworkers. It goes a long way. Just remember to say thank you. Right?
Thanks.
Thanks so much.